Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is OnePeg. So yesterday, IGN ended up sharing with us a little bit of footage about this game called Gray Zone Warfare. Luckily, I have been able to, keep track of the progress of Gray Zone Warfare through their lead CM, whose name is Rick, and actually, luckily enough, lives about 5 minutes away from my house. Strangely enough, we were able to kind of connect over social media and one of the conventions that happened recently. And this footage that is 23 minutes in length was shared with IGN. Now, this is an actual gameplay demo, and a lot of people, it seems, on social media have been talking about how they believe this to be faked or somehow over-rendered. I can tell you from experience and what I have seen from dev conversations in the past that is not the case. This is very much in-game footage. This is actual gameplay. It is a full-on demo of a mission that is being done. Now, this game is being created by an indie dev studio called Mad Finger Games and takes place in a fictitious country that is reminiscent of Laos. We have this island in Southeast Asia that has a very Tarkov-esque history where things have fallen into disarray and now they are in, quote-unquote, a gray zone. The idea here is that it is supposed to follow something more of like a narrative story-driven experience versus that of Tarkov, which is more centralized around it being kind of whatever you make it and piecing together lore as you go along. Now, so far, they have talked about how they have several different weapon systems with over 400 different attachment combinations and the ability to be able to have this very immersive kind of storyboarded experience, although the world in this case seems as though it is persistent. Notice at the beginning of this video, the infill that occurred where a helicopter was dropping you off. It seems as though this is very, very similar to how the Cycle Frontier had its play cycle set up, where this persistent world that kind of continues to move and evolve, whether you're in it or not, ends up being like an infill situation where people come and go, but the world itself persists, at least for a little while. Now, throughout the course of the demo, there looks to be what I can only describe as some very immersive gameplay, especially given that this, which was rendered in 4K and seems as though it has some bells and whistles for its graphic representation kind of turned up with this depth of field effect, kind of like in the foreground, as well as on the optics and whatnot, kind of giving you that clear look past the gun. Seems to be pretty immersive in feel. The look and feel of the animations feels like it's getting closer to what we would really want to see, but isn't quite perfect as of yet. The ragdoll animations are on the way, but there is some slight uniquity with the animations around the medical system. And here you can see that they pull out a tourniquet in order to be able to stop a bleed. At another point in this demo, there was a bandaging animation. It seems as though the first and third person animations for this, whether you are doing it yourself or watching someone else do it, are one-to-one. So when someone is bandaging themselves and you're observing them do so, they have the ability to watch that animation happen as if it was the same as you doing it yourself to your own arm or leg or whatever. And they also had an interesting mechanic with blood bags. It looks like there's a system in the game that has something to do with blood or retaining blood for if you bleed, it kind of ends up a finite resource, kind of like what DayZ has going on, where you can kind of replenish that over time. And of course, throughout the demo, it looks and feels very, very similar to that of Escape from Tarkov. Although what I would argue is, based on how this is being played, the idea is that it's supposed to be much more, slowly paced. A lot of times people playing games like Escape from Tarkov, it feels as though they kind of rush in and just try to knock out whatever quest or whatever they're trying to accomplish. In this game, it feels as though the determining factor or what they're trying to accomplish is something that is more tactical in nature. The people taking damage seem to take a bit more, or the overtime sense of loss with bleeding and whatnot feels relatively semi-permanent. Here you can see them picking up a quest item. It looks very, very interesting and very, very immersive. Unfortunately, there seems to be a lot of comparisons, naturally so, I guess I should say, with Tarkov by saying that this game is somewhat of a knockoff, or the genre has been done before. With this, though, they do have a bit more of a fleshed out, or they're trying to accomplish something a bit more fleshed out than what Tarkov is offering from its questing system. In this game, they're touting that there's approximately 150 quests with 3 different factions. And depending on the faction that you choose, the quests will be kind of akin to that faction that you choose at the start. One of them is more militaristic, more about control. One of them is more diplomatic. So it really would depend on how those quests end up being fleshed out and whether or not the directive for being given to you about where to go with these quests is something that makes the most sense for the player playing it. I, for one, am not necessarily opposed to the idea of having a quest system kind of guiding me along whatever the storyboarded idea of the game is. I think that that's kind of a unique take, especially considering that this game is one that's designed around PvPvE, where there is like the AI element as well as other players that you will eventually end up having to combat in this as well. The idea of there being like this storyboarded mission system where you go in and try to accomplish whatever goal, and that kind of furthers along the story-driven narrative with what they have said is relatively permanent decision-making and reputation systems that will modify how the story ends up going along the way, I think is a very, very interesting take. Something that Tarkov has talked about trying to make happen, but hasn't yet really been able to implement in a way where people can actually have those influences, aside from kind of ticking off Lightkeeper, but then getting back into his good graces after a handful of missions or something. But of course, you have to end up taking this with a bit of a grain of salt, right? These are developers or players working with the developers on trying to present the game in a way that the developers intend it to be played. And that's not necessarily the way that gamers would end up interpreting this, nor would we or should we expect that gamers playing this are going to play it in this fashion, being slow and careful and tactical. Now, this large and immersive map that is kind of being inspired by Laos called looming is a 42-kilometer square map. It's a very, very large map. And if you notice, there aren't any zone borders or loading into like different mission areas that you would have over Tarkov. So in this case, very similar to how the Cycle Frontier operated, it's just one extremely large map. Much larger than what the Cycle Frontier had, as a matter of fact. So in this case, being able to traverse that entire map is something that I think would be of large benefit to the player base. Because if you have something very large and very immersive, as long as they could get the player counts on the map to the, I guess, size that you would want to see it at any given moment in time, that would be a huge step, a huge benefit to a game like this over something like Tarkov. Because a huge, persistent map that is ever changing and ever modified would be something very, very interesting to an awful lot of people, I think. Just to give you an idea of comparison, all of the maps combined for Escape from Tarkov are probably somewhere around like 15 square kilometers, probably more like 12. So an area of 42 square kilometers, if you want to give some scale to that, is considerably larger. Okay, now let's kind of just make mention of the dev studio. So the dev studio, Madfinger Games, is out of the Czech Republic. The co-founders spent considerable years at 2K Czech working on some canceled and unannounced games. They have some senior devs that were responsible for working on or working with Mafia, Mafia 2, Mafia 3. And Madfinger's history doesn't have a whole lot of robust stuff here when it comes to the PC gaming world. They aren't really familiar with PC game-centric shooters. That most of their time spent since the studio was founded in 2008 was more centralized around mobile games, games like Shadowgun and Dead Trigger, which are really relatively, I guess, basic in their scope and size, but were pretty well regarded as mobile games go. Prior to this game, their latest release was a game called Shadowgun War Games, which seemed very similar to that of Overwatch back in 2020, which ended up being canceled just due to poor performance and the inability to sustain some developmental resources in order to make it right. So on the surface, while it seems historically that it looks as though they may end up having a good amount of experience, but also could be regarded as a dev team that might be kind of chasing the extraction genre a little bit in designing a game like this, if I may, this game does look, at least on the surface, from what we've seen so far, extremely playable. The map looks very, very good insofar as what we've been shown here. It looks like you're able to move around pretty freely. There is very, very good gun mechanics from what I can tell. The recoil looks very, very good. And at the same time, if I also may, the development team seems to be incredibly approachable. It seems as though they're interacting with the community an awful lot for people that have input, people that want to see certain features or functions in the game, and they're constantly updating us with developer blogs, trying to keep word going out there an awful lot. And if you look around on the internet, you can find a lot of internal interviews, discussions of people and their roles in the company, what they're doing, what they're trying to accomplish. The CMs for the team, especially the one that resides in the US, Rick, who I've been happy enough to work with and talk to, has been very, very integral in helping me with my understanding of the game and the development team. And Devil Dog Gamer is also working very, very closely with the dev team as one of their core people, trying to help them develop a very immersive and very tactical shooting receiving experience. Now, of course, whether or not this story-driven narrative, the quest, the persistent map, etc., is enough to be able to sway gamers away from Escape from Tarkov and play this instead as like a no-lifer style of experience, I don't really think comes into play here. As an alternative or something supplemental to that of Tarkov, where it generates a halfway decent audience, perhaps has some better mechanic ideas and whatnot, it could end up having some staying power. The devs, in my opinion, at least seem as though they have some real passion behind them. And if they're trying to, at their very best, try to generate some form of truly tactical and immersive gaming experience that isn't necessarily about the run and gun style of gunplay that we're used to seeing in a game like Tarkov, I think thematically, it could end up actually having a little bit of staying power here. Of course, time is going to tell. We really don't know where this is going to go, but I personally look forward to the opportunity to be able to play through some alpha gameplay test kind of phase stuff, which hopefully I will be able to do here in the next maybe month or two, and then give my impression once they allow me to be able to talk to you about it. Luckily enough, I am in a position where I can be one of the content creators that they like to tap for certain aspects of the game and feedback and whatnot. So once I'm able to get some gameplay time in, and hopefully in the near future, I've been working on trying to get an interview with some of the key devs involved. I think it'll give us all a better idea of what we can expect from this game. For now, though, I am hopefully optimistic with what they are making here. I think Tarkov in the Jungle seems like it would be a pretty fun experience, and as long as the gameplay feels immersive and gets my blood pumping, why not? I mean, I'm down to see what we can do. Anyway, guys, thanks so much for coming and checking it out. If you would be so kind as to sub the channel here, I would really, really appreciate it. If you end up liking this kind of content, please consider subscribing to the channel and maybe click the bell. You know, why not? In the meantime, you can come and check me out over at twitch.tv/onepeg, where I stream every day around 7 to 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until whenever. But until then, I suppose I will see you in the next one. Thanks so much. Peace.